Good morning, everybody. We're just waiting for everyone to join us this morning. Good morning to those who are just joining us. We're just waiting for all our attendees to settle in and join us this Monday morning. Good morning to everyone who's joined us early. We're just waiting for our attendees to join us and those numbers to just continue to creep up. And then we'll get on with the presentation. All right then, so good morning everyone and welcome to the webinar. So today we are joined by Innovation for Agriculture and I am your host Annabelle from Agri-EPI Centre. So please let us know where you're listening from, interact with us in the chat, let us know the company whereabouts you're listening from, and also we want to hear from you later for the Q&A session as well. So we are going to be talking today about unlocking the potential of agri-tech on farm. So Agri-EPI Centre and Innovation for Agriculture are here to provide you with information on how they can support your company to develop a solution which can have an actual on-farm impact. So we're looking at those initial trials on real commercial farms, technology exchange and dissemination and co-design and development. So we're going to hear more from the team Innovation for Agriculture and also Rebecca Lewis from Agri-EPI Centre. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to New Business Proposals Manager, Rebecca Lewis at Agri-EPI Centre. So Rebecca, over to you to start sharing your screen.
Right, morning everybody. I hope you can see my screen. Excellent. Okay, so I'm Rebecca Lewis. I'm Agri-EPI's New Business and Proposals Manager, which means basically that I look after our collaborative R&D pipeline. And I help our members develop their ideas into projects and help them, support them on building bids and so on, working with the rest of our team to do that. So I can move my slides on. Here we go. So Agriepi was established around 5 years ago, together with 3 other agri-tech centres, which are CL on the livestock side, CHAP on crop health and protection, and agrimetrics on big data and analytics. Agriepi's remit is engineering precision innovation, which is the EPI bit. And that's a very broad remit, which encompasses all sectors of agriculture. So we get involved in livestock, we get involved in horticulture, arable, and aquaculture as well. It covers a very broad range of technology areas and applications as well. So really, we try to provide an ecosystem to support R&D collaboration in agri-tech. This is driven by farming and industry challenges, leading to innovation which develops solutions which meet those challenges. So we try and create this feedback loop between farming and the agri-food industry and technology. I won't go into sort of every single point on this slide, but I'll just pick up a few of the more sort of salient aspects that are relevant to the theme of this webinar. So we have a membership network, which is now fast approaching 200 members across farming, technology, the supply chain and research. And we really try and sort of link those together to build networks, build collaborations and connections to facilitate a really good agri-tech development. We also have our satellite farm network, which is around 24, I think there's another couple coming on board, farms, commercial farms that are spread across the UK, covering multiple sectors of agriculture. And they've partnered with us to support the co-development, validation, evaluation of emerging agri-tech solutions. It also provides a really good basis for knowledge exchange programs and dissemination across the wider industry as well. And we particularly endorse a sort of a peer-to-peer approach to knowledge exchange and dissemination, where farmers and growers themselves can share their experiences with one another when it comes to their shared challenges and their experiences with solutions. So I won't dwell too much more on the other aspects of what's shown on the slide here, but obviously if anyone wants any more information, then don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us. I also wanted to introduce our innovation pathway concept, which is sort of a visualization of how we see the whole process of innovation from ideation right through to commercialization. And really the farm network is kind of placed very much front and center of this process. And the emphasis is on both the design and the testing stages of building up that innovation and taking it from an idea to the marketplace. So at each stage of the design, which starts with very broad and high level kind of requirements gathering, right through to the very detailed sort of specification, it brings together the technologists and the technology developers with end users, in different ways that's appropriate to each stage of that design and development process. And each step of the design has a corresponding testing phase to ensure that it is meeting those requirements that have been fed in, by those end users and by those farmers and growers and other end users and stakeholders that would be involved in the uptake of the technology. So obviously we have our satellite farm network, which I've mentioned, which is a network of quite technology enabled farms with a lot of data that we can extract from those farms through technologies that they have and that we've provided them with as well. But it's also important to tap into wider networks, and that's where the likes of Innovation for Agriculture with their broad farming connections are really important to bring in as well. So that at each step you've got the appropriate inputs from the industry, and again the sort of the outputs as well in terms of getting feedback on the technology as it goes through design and testing stages. So a typical project in terms of a grant funded sort of CR&D project is probably unlikely to go through this whole process right from ideation all the way to commercialization. But this graphic is really intended to sort of visualize how we see a technology progressing along this process, and a project might sort of just take it and show progress through sort of part of the way, incorporating these principles, and that gives a really firm foundation for sort of carrying on that journey towards commercialization. So as we're all aware, there is funding that has just been launched. I don't really want to dwell too much on this because we've sort of been planning this webinar since sort of well before this funding was launched, but nonetheless, I wouldn't want it to be an elephant in the room either. So yeah, this funding has been launched from DEFRA to support agri-tech R&D to drive on-farm impact. And it really places farmers and growers at the heart of the innovation process, which is something that we fully support. there's 3 strands for kind of different stages of ideas and technology development, and there's more funding to follow next year. I don't want to say too much more about it other than the funding is there, and engagement of farmers, growers and other end users is really going to be key to successful applications within the stream and key to driving impact as a result of this funding investment that's being made. With that in mind, and Annabelle also just asked me to go over some sort of tips for project building and generating a good application. So apologies if some of you have seen this before, but nonetheless, I think it's worth going over again. So the key questions I think to ask yourself well before putting pen to paper on an application is it really answering a market need? And again, going back to the farmers and growers and the industry challenges is really, really important in determining that. Does the project have clear objectives and outputs? So again, going back to that whole innovation process, you're unlikely to be able to cover all of that within a project. So you really need to be quite focused on what you do want to achieve, what the objectives are, and make sure that the assessor is really clear on what's going to happen in this project, what is the outcome of that going to be, and how does that help drive towards impact on farm. Do you have the right team? And in this case, that team will include access to growers and farmers, and they might be involved directly in the project as a partner, or they might be involved in other ways. Do you have the right support for any research that's required? You might need academic involvement, for example, and it might need technology, supply chain and industry involvement as well. What other resources are needed? So as well as people, you might need sort of testing facilities, you might need access to different capabilities and so on. So have you thought about where those are going to come from? And then it seems like a blindingly obvious one, but is it really fully aligning with the competition scope and the objectives that the funder has? Because that's obviously critically important. I think sometimes as a business, technology developers want to achieve a certain thing and almost try to fit that to the scope of the competition, but it really kind of does need to, the two really do need to be very well married together. Secondly, you need to tell a really good story. You need to really sell your project and sell your innovation to the reader, to the assessor, and that's really important, because if they start to get confused or a bit lost or they're unsure about what you mean, then it's going to be reflected in the scores. The business case needs to be there. So that is the business case for you as a technology developer. It's also the business case for the customer, for the end user, the farmer, and or the supply chain, as appropriate, depending on what you're doing. So you really need to understand the economic impact to both your own business, but also to the customers' businesses on farm. And also, is it good value for money for the funder? So it needs to they need to see a return investment on that grant that they're putting in. And then finally, at a practical level, make sure you understand the grant process in terms of submission and also what follows should your project be successful. It's really important that everybody in the consortium understands that, because there are a lot of obligations, once your project has been assessed. That's obviously just the beginning, and there's a lot of things that people need to be aware of. Gather evidence. It's actually quite a lot of work goes into building the case for all of the arguments that you're making in your application. They need to be backed up by sound data, perhaps referring to previous research and so on, that can be actually cited within the bid. That's really important to give a really convincing argument. Demonstrating a really convincing route to market as well. The assessors need to be really clear that this isn't just going to be a really cool piece of kit or piece of technology that's being developed. It's actually got a credible route to market and to on-farm impact as well. Work with the customer and the user. I mean, obviously this is the whole topic of the webinar, so that's really, really important. And really bring them in right from the beginning. It's not just an add-on that goes on the end, or we're going to do a dissemination workshop or something. It really needs to be embedded throughout the process. Across your consortium, everybody needs to have aligned expectations and goals so that there's no sort of surprises or no curveballs thrown in at any point. Everyone really does need to be on the same page. So having regular meetings throughout the project and bid development process is really, really important, and working together. Costs obviously need to be aware of everyone's costs, make sure they fit the funding model, and make sure that people have got a good appreciation of all of the costs that are going to go into the project, both cash costs and in terms of things like labour costs and so on as well. And sharing responsibility for the proposal. These funded projects, they're nearly always collaborative projects, so you need to be working hand in hand with all your partners, and really the proposal is the place where that should start. If you can't collaborate on the proposal, it doesn't bode well for collaborating in the actual implementation of the project and beyond. Start early. Funding deadlines are often tight, and they do creep up very, very quickly. So the earlier you can make a start, the better, even before funding is announced. I would strongly advise to start building ideas and partnerships. And I said it before, but it's really important. Tell a story and really win your assessors' enthusiasm and excitement and for your idea right from the start of your application. So those are my tips, and I'll hand back to Annabelle now for the next part of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for those really insightful presentation there. So those slides will be available as well after the session. So there were some questions on that as well. So now we've heard from Agri-EPI Centre, we are going to hand over to Innovation for Agriculture. And we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Lisa Morgans, who is Head of Livestock at Innovation for Agriculture, and Laura Pelzinski, who is Livestock Research Assistant. So over to both of you. We can see.
Thank you, Annabelle. So thank you for that introduction. And yes, so today Lisa and I will be talking to you a little bit about co-design with and for farmers. There we go. So as I said, we are Innovation for Agriculture, which was set up by the Royal Agricultural Society in England a few years ago now. We are an independent knowledge exchange charity, which is focused on agricultural and land-based solutions to current and future challenges in farming. We work with researchers, landowners, businesses, farmers, anyone who's interested really, to develop knowledge and technologies that make modern farming more sustainable, resilient and productive. And we do that by facilitating opportunities for dialogue and discussions and co-learning to promote valuable and insightful two-way exchanges for productive and proactive outcomes. And that might involve peer-to-peer learning opportunities, or even across a range of supply chain and industry actors, and getting different people together in the same room. That usually involves some sort of practical and interactive workshop or farm walk or demonstrations. And with those expertise in mind, we could help provide a middle ground between agri-tech companies and farmers and farm advisors to help generate useful insights and outcomes of how to make use of tech on the ground and what needs to be incorporated into the design stages and development. And Lisa will tell us a little bit more about that process later on. So our main aim is ultimately to bridge the gap between science and practice of, okay, we've produced some really interesting stuff, but how are we going to get it used on the ground? As said, participatory and farmer-led is the way forwards. So in the interest of facilitation, we would like to get to know you a bit. So if you could either get out your phone or open a web browser and go to menti.com and type in the code 94884489, then we can get started getting to know you, and I will stop sharing my screen, and Lisa, you can show us what's happening on Menti.
Okay, so I'll give people a few seconds to get onto the Menti. The code is at the top of your screen now as well, in case you missed it. And it will ask you to join the presentation. You have the first question coming up there, which are the following terms best describes what you do.
Oh, first one is an other. So.
Do feel free to put the others in what you do in the chat, because we're very much like, who are we going to get in the audience? Not sure. And again, if there's any technical problems, just type in the chat and we'll try and help you. Quite spread.
Yeah. So one of the others is an innovation funding consultancy. Thank you, Ian, for letting us know that.
So Laura, we've got about 30 people on the call, so we're about 20 have responded now. We'll move to the next question in a second. So here's the way when you start making these categories, you kind of go down. Keep more categories.
Economic development using aquaponics and other technologies. Larry, thank you.
So I'll move on to the next one, because I think we've plateaued. If there's anyone who hasn't managed to get on Menti, just put the same answer in the chat if that's easier. Just following terms best describes what you do, or just what you do. Right, next question. What does innovation mean to you? This comes up as a nice pretty word cloud that I'm sure many of you have seen before, who are familiar with Menti. Because we find it gets used lots of different ways. It can be quite confusing for farming. Excellent. Yeah. It's the right range of terms there, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I like the pushing boundaries. Easier, yeah, better. Yeah, sustainability is coming out quite strong, which is good. So generally, for those of you not familiar with Menti, the bigger word is where more people have said the same thing. Well, we've got meeting the needs. I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at similar number again. So move on to the next question. Oh no, it's still going up. Maybe not. So I'll give you a few more seconds if anyone's frantically typing in still. Next question. So, what frustrates you about technology utilization in farming? There might be somebody in the audience new to the farming sector, but others much experience. So what frustrates you about technology utilization? We hope that what we're going to say today in today's webinar may help address some of these frustrations. Adoption. Lack of connection, good. Yeah, this connectivity is coming up here a lot. Yeah, limited benchmarking. Yeah, I like that one. The lack of interconnectivity between all the parts. It's kind of like, systems thinking. Doesn't work. Yeah. Good one. Yeah, analysis of needs. Yeah, it's really insightful contributions. Addictive to external funding. Yeah. Yeah. Funding treadmill. That's an interesting one. Rich farmers get richer and the poor increasingly struggle to survive. Give a few more seconds because we've got to about 30 contributions here. Everywhere's unique, yeah. Context is everything. Yeah. I've got one more question for you after this, and it's you'll be glad to know there's no typing for the next one. Okay, right. Next question. So this is a ranking exercise now, this last one, from whether you strongly disagree with a statement on your screen or strongly agree. So we've got farmers should be involved at strategic points in designing and developing farm tech. Cost is the main barrier to tech adoption on farms. Farming needs more automation. Farmers should be central to designing and developing farm tech. Internet connectivity is the main barrier to tech adoption on farms. Skills, confidence, work cultures are the main barriers to tech adoption on farm. Farming needs more data support services. This might take a little more while to come through. And as you all start voting, the lines will move around to represent the average. Very interesting. I think the main barriers one's got everyone a bit split because there's obviously lots of barriers depending where you look. All of these results as well will be saved and obviously anonymous and can be shared after the webinar. We'll send those to Agriepi. Excuse Laura, it looks like we've got an audience that will agree with a lot of what we were talking about, which is excellent.
That's what we like to hear.
Okay, give you a few more seconds. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand back to you, Laura.
So, yeah, so thanks for taking part in those many questions. It's really good to get some insight into what you want and think and do about these areas. So that's helpful. Now we'd also like to share a few snippets of what farmers have said to us or farming industry have said to us about agri-tech. And so there's a couple of quotes here. So everything can be done through an app these days. The trouble is you either need a bigger screen, good glasses, or a teenager to get the best out of it. So so there's a need for tech to be easy to use and have support systems in place for anyone who doesn't have a spare teenager lying around to help them. People just want to take my data to reuse the data to make us more money and be more efficient. So who owns the data and what purpose does it actually serve? And in terms of farmers, they need to be practical, simple, and time-saving, as this quote indicates here. Within farming, if you add a minute to someone's day or a minute to weighing a single animal, it doesn't matter if you generate them £1 million of revenue, they'll find it too much of a pain and they won't use it. If you save them 15 seconds, they'll love you for it. We've constantly got to think about how we're making their lives easier in a practical sense. So a desire for actionable insights that's easy to use, that can help inform management decisions immediately and easily without adding any time to your day, without adding faff to your day. So these are the kind of things that are in line with actually what the Menti results were indicating, that kind of idea of value creation and taking account of context and making things easier by creating integrated systems with tech that's linked together rather than multiple different access points for that data, bringing everything together to go, okay, this is happening. This is what you should do about it today on your farm with, you know, whatever you're dealing with. It's So with that in mind, I will hand over to Lisa to talk a bit about the Codesign code development.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I'll leave you in. Oh, no.
Oh, press the wrong button.
Right. Okay. Right. So hopefully this is going to be a bit of a reminder for many of you, I suppose, or an update on the Codesign code development process. But some people, this may be quite a new idea, so we can help you with some steps and practical tips on how to implement this kind of idea. So we'll talk a little bit about what it is and how you can do it, and then contextualize that a bit from our farming experience, trying to do this kind of idea with farmers. So co-design and co-development is essentially, rather than a prescriptive process, it is more guiding principles about how we can work when designing solutions for the farming sector. Now, this diagram on your screen is taken from actually a participatory facilitation group that describes the co-design process in this cyclical iterative feedback mechanism. And I always kind of encourage people to start from this top right-hand corner, but this is an ongoing process that doesn't really have a sort of start and an end as such. It's something that informs how you work right from the off and through the development of any products or services. And it critically recognises the human side of innovation. Yes, innovation can be technology, and innovation is sort of progressive and pushing boundaries and new ways of thinking and doing, but it critically has humans at its centre, and without recognition and building of humans into that, it's going to struggle. So taking that top right corner, building the conditions. We always encourage people to start with a process of reflection, and this is kind of what, like Rebecca was saying at the start, with those questions. Are you and your organisation the right people for the work you're trying to do? Who else is needed? What other expertise? And who are you targeting? So that seems really obvious, but who are those target audience? Who are those end users? And how well do you know them? Do you have those connections already built up? Do you have a wide network? This is something we at Innovation for Agriculture and Agri-EPI can help you with, connecting up to the target audience. And then how well do you know their world, their decisions, their work cultures, the people that they're interacting with, where they get their information and support. So that's the first step. And then once you've really identified who those people are and reached out and made connections, it's a process of immersing yourself and aligning to that target audience. There's some brilliant technologies and services and products out there, quite often developed in silos without any interaction with the end user. And literally last week, we invited some researchers to a farm walk we held on a dairy farm, and tongue in cheek, it was quite entertaining watching them try to milk some cows and sit in the parlour with the cows, and they were quite shocked at the what cows do when they're in the parlour, defecate. And it's that, without embracing yourself into that world and understanding what it's like to use any of the technology they might want to have developed, it can be very hard to make a high impact, good value product. So immerse yourself, spend lots of time understanding those you're targeting and aligning with them. Now, this touches on the kind of power balance that can sometimes be in agri-tech and in any kind of knowledge transfer activities. Sometimes there's a lot of power in the scientific community or in the academic institutions, and then that is then passed down in a one-way manner to users of that knowledge with very little cyclical feedback loops to change. So we encourage any design and development process to be open to change and steering off course to what you're comfortable with and handing over that baton of power to those that you're either trying to change or trying to get to adopt your product or service. And then it goes through this sort of discovery and design process. And this is not a prescriptive step-by-step thing. This is very much going to be decided upon by who you're working with and what you're designing and developing. But this process of doing it together, hand in hand, through a series, could be one-to-one events, collaborative workshops, focus groups, get-togethers. There's lots of different mechanisms and activities you can do, but going through a discovery and design phase together with your end users, and then entering into a test and refine phase where there's constant feedback between the parties and change as a result of that. And this doesn't just stop there. The implementation of any product or service is again a learning process, and starting off fairly quite small really with some of the things you want to do, rather than a revolution straight away with your product. It's like, let's get it out there and test it in the world that we want to change, or the end users we're trying to target. So that's a nice little summary diagram, I think helps describe the co-design process. Putting that in a bit more of a farming context, and from our own experiences working in farming and research, there's a few sort of tips we wanted to help sort of highlight that might prove useful. So going back to this user part, we've got a really good network of farms, the livestock, in particular in our sense, me and Laura, but also in the sort of arable soils and water sector, that we work with really closely, who are really engaged, really keen to talk with researchers, talk to technology companies, and learn from one another. So we can connect you up there, and we can facilitate those interactions, those meetings with farmers, particularly if you don't have those networks, which is a really beneficial starting point. And as Rebecca was saying with the Agri-EPI service, it can be quite hard to fill all of those steps in that innovation pathway, but we really do encourage that first, what understanding your user, what do they need and want, before starting embarking on the rest of it. Asking yourself those sort of critical, quite uncomfortable questions. Does your product or service you're offering, is it better than what's already there, or what farmers are already doing and using? I've found in my experience that when farms do adopt technology, particularly in the livestock sector, it's at a point where they're already looking to replace something, or it's something they don't have and it's going to make their life a lot easier, rather than, they're already doing something to detect lameness, for instance. Are they going to implement something different when they've already got a system that they find works? That's the first sort of critical appraisal part. And that can be a very uncomfortable process to go through. It can sometimes be like you have to accept that what you don't really want to accept. But if you do that in a collaborative fashion with facilitation, it can be a really useful learning experience. And the next bit is then keep going with the farmers, keeping in contact and communication, offering your skills and services to farming, to help them really will build up that trust and that development process, rather than just wait until the end where you've got your product or service and you just want to raise awareness, disseminate it out there. And that's going to be to people that potentially don't even know who you are and you haven't built that relationship with. So planning your delivery and ongoing support systems with networks that you've built that relationship up with can be really helpful. And we can help facilitate that. Now, a key principle of what we do and what our research, other people in this field's research has shown, is that collaboration is key. And bringing people together from lots of different walks of life, who have different stakes in what you're doing, the product, the service, is critical for inspiring and supporting change. And that change could be adoption of technology. So it kind of sounds repetitive, but forming those personal connections has been crucial for those successful tech companies that have had really good buy-in and take up with their technology. A thing that we keep going on about is something we found in the sphere of sort of medicine usage and animal health data, is enabling farmers to use their own data, that what's already on farm. It can be great, to have some brand new technology that can autonomously assess the fields of that farm and the growth rates of the growth of the grass. But if the farmers are sitting on a mine of information just about their herd or flock that they don't have the capacity or capabilities to analyze and do something with, and we're really missing a useful added value there. So working farmers to understand what they've already got and equip it. Do they want to play around with the data? Do they want to get nerdy essentially about analysis, or is there someone else that they have in their trusted circles that could help them? It probably sounds like a bit of a resource heavy exercise sometimes, co-design and code development, but getting people together in one event, one workshop, rather than doing lots of one-to-ones, can actually be a very resource efficient use of everybody's time. And it has the added benefit of being able to ping ideas off one another and hear from other perspectives that can really progress that innovative thinking. Laura and Rebecca have mentioned this earlier, but the idea of making something easier for people, shaving seconds off daily processes or an hour every week so people can spend more time with their friends and family, is worth its weight in gold. Cost is important, profitability is important, and obviously the bottom line will matter, but that's not necessarily the key motivating factor for doing a change, adopting a different technology or process. So hopefully that's helped with the people aspect of innovation. And really to sort of wrap up how we can help as a knowledge exchange charity is we've got a lot of experience combining research and tech development with farming know-how and enabling farmers to feed into that loop as well, and empowering them to have a say and a voice in the research and technology development field. And in our personal experience, we found some of the most successful agri-tech companies have farming expertise and farming know-how central to what they do, resulting in more effective and efficient outcomes. And quite often, circumnavigating that whole process at what classically happens at the end of this tech adoption, because the farmers are already bought into the process and already have a lot of their needs met. So we can help join you up with end users such as farmers and their advisors and facilitate these connections and discussions. With practical farming expertise in the team, research and academic expertise, as well as facilitation skills. We ultimately connect, translate, transfer, and exchange knowledge to support farming innovation. So to finish off, when we come together to solve challenges, often complex, messy, multifactorial, lots of pushes and pulls, problems, it can make things a whole lot easier and the solutions easier to come by. So I really encourage you, multi-stakeholder approach and connecting up with those that we're trying to change. So I encourage you to get in touch. Some of our contact details are on the screen now. And we're looking really forward to having a lively sort of debate and Q&A after this session. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lisa. That was brilliant there. So great to hear about all the great work you've been doing with farmers and continue to do as well to support them in enabling agri-tech. So we've got some questions that we're going to run through to all of the panelists. So if you want to come back on with your videos on, and then we can go through those as well. So my first one I'm going to hand over to Rebecca with, which is clearly we've heard about this DEFRA funding. You did allude to it earlier in your presentation, but it would be good just to understand around the best way to engage with farmers in this R&D funding. So how we start on that process.
Okay, so I mean, sort of as I alluded to earlier, there's different strands of this funding. So the first one, the research starter, is actually very much farmer-led, and it's an opportunity for farmers to propose their own ideas, and they need to do that by a video submission by the 24th of November, I think it is. It's off the top of my head. So that's sort of one way for farmers themselves to put forward their ideas for innovation and their challenges and problems that you know need addressing and ideas that they have for solutions. In terms of the other strands, I think it's really important that farmers are brought in kind of right throughout the process, as you know, as Lisa and Laura and I have sort of been saying. There's different ways to do that. Farmers can obviously come into projects as full partners. There are obviously implications of doing that, and some farms or farmers may be more suited to doing that than others if they're depending on how their businesses are structured and the sort of time and resources that they have available to them. Otherwise, farmers can be brought into projects through organisations that have access to farmer networks, like Innovation for Agriculture, like Agriepi, and like others as well. Yeah, I'd say depending on types of projects that you're wanting to do, the types of farmers that you're wanting to access, it's worth kind of, I suppose, contacting some different organisations to see how they can be, you know, brought to bear within your project. But they really do need to be absolutely central, as we've said, I think multiple times, in terms of both helping to design and develop those ideas, as well as to sort of test and validate them and kind of roll the message out.
Thanks, Rebecca, that's great. And then a question, I'm going to direct it both Lisa and Laura at this point, but how much end user / farmer engagement is enough and appropriate in co-design and development?
Yeah, Can be a tricky question because there's not a prescriptive process for this kind of co-design and co-development. So it really does depend on who you are as an organization and what you're trying to achieve. If you already have a sort of product that you basically want to improve and develop rather than starting at the very beginning of the co-design process, then you probably have quite a niche target audience that you can work with. But I think at the start, when you've got an organization with a great deal of technology expertise and skill, you could probably go quite broad, and there's always more engagement and farmer input that you can have, which may then be a bit like resource and time limited. So I also always say, people, I want to tackle farming, I want to get farmer expertise involved. And I'm like, well, what kind of farms? Because every farm's different. There's the sector and system splits as well. So finding out what different types of farming systems need, and then where you can fit in, will probably dictate a little bit when there's enough engagement. Hopefully that helped.
Brilliant. Okay, but linking into that then, so how do you go about recruiting the farmers into this process as well?
It's echoing again what Rebecca was saying. It's trying to work with communities and groups that already have networks, because the trusted element is really key. It's quite hard to sort of just passively engage when there's, you're hoping people come to you and they don't really know who you are. It's not just a farming thing, that's just a human nature thing. You like a recommendation, you like some kind of trust or mark that person you're going to engage with and put your time into is worth it, essentially. So working with those that already have those networks, and they can pair you up almost, or group you up. So if there's a certain skill set an organization has and wants to help develop a solution to something, those organizations may already know farms and farm advisors that are interested in that or working in that sphere. So yeah, working with existing organizations, speaking to people who are already trusted advisors or groups is the way to go about it, I would say.
Okay, brilliant. And then a question to you, Rebecca, in terms of Agriepi's satellite farm network. So if you could just sort of describe, what kind of farms we've got there and how that works as well.
Okay, so the farm network that we have is really varied. It covers right across the country, from kind of the north of Scotland down to the south coast of England. We have dairy farms and beef and sheep farms. We have pig and poultry represented. We have arable cropping, potatoes, root crops, some horticulture, although it's not probably our strongest sort of sector within the network. And within those, we'll have different sizes of farms, different structures. We'll have organic farming systems as well as conventional. There will be farmers in there that are quite sort of intensive, high input, high output farmers, and those that are more extensive as well. So a real range of different types of farming businesses and different systems and technologies that they're adopting. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
No, that does, Rebecca, thank you. We've got a couple more minutes left, so I thought it'd be quite nice to talk about your favourite or a favoured R&D project that you've been involved with, or that sticks to mind that you think that's a really great example of what we've been talking about. Rebecca, I'm going to go over to you first for yours.
Okay. So one that springs to mind that had really good kind of grower involvement is an ongoing project that we have, which is looking at developing a automated harvester for lettuce. So this came about in response to the challenge that the horticulture industry has with shortage of labour, which is a long-term kind of structural challenge in the industry caused by lots of kind of long-term issues, but really has been brought to a head with the sort of coinciding of Brexit and COVID and other things as well. So yeah, Agri-EPI was involved together with the Knowledge Transfer Network and other partners as well, University of Lincoln and others, in a sort of industry initiative to try to galvanise technology to help address this challenge, quite urgent challenge faced by the sector. As a result of that, a number of different things came out, one of which was this consortium, which was led by Agriepi, the technology or farming technology and equipment company, a company called IDS, which provides camera technologies, University of the West of England as the academic partner, Agri-EPI as well, but also the two main growers, or the two largest growers within that sector in the UK, PDM and G's. So together they represent kind of 80% of lettuce production in the UK, if I remember rightly from writing the proposal. So it was really strong grower input to that project. And obviously these are two growers that normally would be competing, and they've come together collaboratively to address a shared challenge. And I think that's key, the fact that it is a shared industry challenge. Now, in this case, they were large growers in the lettuce sector, obviously quite corporate, I suppose. But the same principle would apply in the dairy sector, working with smaller dairy farms, for example. It's about having that shared challenge where there's a real tangible industry need that's being addressed. So yeah, that would be one example that came to mind, Annabelle.
That's great, thank you, Rebecca. And then over to Lisa and Laura for theirs.
Okay, yeah, Laura, do feel to interject because this is quite a diffuse example. It started, I suppose, with we were project coordinators in the 4D4F project, was data-driven decision-making for dairy farmers, which is EU Horizon 2020. So that kind of kick-started a lot of interest and knowledge sharing around wearable sensors, particularly on dairy cows, and how they can improve the monitoring of behaviour of cows, particularly when there's like low labour or hard to get labour, large farms, and that informed decision-making of farmers to manage animal health better, prevent disease quicker, and ultimately improve their welfare. And we've kind of brought in not just farmers, but also the companies that develop these wearable sensor technologies to learn from one another and what else is needed and how they're being used on farms and which ones have been more favourable and why. And it's culminated in lots of different sort of knowledge exchange activities between the different stakeholders, and with certain wearable sensors being more successful. And even a couple of weeks ago, we held a farm walk with a guy who's been using accelerometer ear tags to monitor the cow behaviour, and demonstrated that to the wider industry about, well, this is an example of how it's being used well, what it can do, and some of the issues still around that. And that was seen to be really valuable to the industry, particularly non-farmers actually, which is very interesting how that can be useful.
Brilliant, thank you. There we go. So that concludes our session today. So thank you very much to Laura and Lisa for joining us from Innovation for Agriculture, who are one of our members, and we really value and appreciate their time today. We can see some great opportunities going forward for tech developers on this call and anybody else who is looking to develop solutions and bring in the farmer element, which we have understood from this call is absolutely crucial when we're looking at developing technology. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time as well for those who've listened. If you have got colleagues or other people who you may have thought this would be useful for, we can send across a recording to that as well. And again, any of the email contacts from Rebecca, Lisa and Laura will be available as well after the session for you to take forward any conversations. So thank you, everybody, and have a good Monday. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.